Welcome back. Welcome to Internet Nerd MythBusters, the show where we separate internet myths from reality. Every episode, we take a popular claim about technology, the internet, or digital systems, and then we ask one simple question. Is it actually true? Or were you lying? Or were you being sensationalist? Or were you being funny? Or were you trying to be controversial? This is where you get to know the truth, right? So today we're tackling one of the most controversial, sensationalist debates on the internet, which is, do data centers really use too much water? This episode draws on research and resources from the Florida Water and Population Control Operators Association. Oh my God, that's a mouthful. Alongside publicly available industry reports. Now, if you've watched our Internet Nerd Explains episodes on AI and water, you already know that data centers do use water. But the internet has a habit of turning complex issues into some simple, basic headlines without nuance or context. And then things start to get messy from there. So by the end of this video, you'll be able to separate headlines from reality and then also have much more smarter conversations about data centers and water, if you're that interested about it. So without further ado, and if you give me the honors, let us bust some myths. Myth one. Oh my God, I'm not with my pen right now, but it's fine. Let's just get right into it. You hear this one a lot. So the idea is that every data center is sucking up enormous amounts of water and leaving local communities with less. Not entirely true. Now, let me answer, or let me dispel, or maybe give more context to that claim. Of course, the answer could benefit from a little more context. For sure, some data centers use a lot of water, but not all data centers are the same, right? A hyperscale or large-scale AI data center can withdraw millions of gallons of water every day. Meanwhile, a much smaller enterprise data center might use little water by comparison. Like I'd mentioned, data centers and AI data centers are two different things. So it just also depends, right? So in all of this, water usage by data centers could benefit from some context. It depends on scale, depends on location, and maybe even the cooling technology that is in the data center or that the data centers do use, right? Just to throw in some statistics to give you context. Across the US, data centers account for less than 1% of total water withdrawals, right? So nationally, data centers are not like among the biggest users of water. Like I'd mentioned, if you go back to that Internet Nerd Explains episode, I referenced agriculture, energy production, population growth, and the other factors to be very huge consumers of water as well. So, but then bringing it back to data centers, nuance is important because local impacts can be significant depending on where we are talking about, right? Say a city, I think it's the Dalles in Oregon, for instance, right? Google's data centers reportedly accounted for about 25% of the city's water use in 2021. So if you're living in a water scarce community, that is a very different conversation from looking at national statistics, right? That is why I would say there's not a single answer to the question of if data centers use too much water, because sometimes the concern is justified, sometimes it's not exactly the case. It depends on the city or the community we're speaking of, right? So, like I said, the Dalles, Oregon, of course, that's a very worthy concern, but it's not to say that is like, it's meant to be like what should be called a blanket concern, right? So, of course, like I said, it depends on the community involved. It depends on the local water supply in that community. It depends on the cooling system employed by these data centers and where the water is coming from in the first place, right? So the good news is that, in fact, many newer data center facilities are now beginning to reduce their reliance on fresh drinking water. They now instead use reclaimed wastewater or recycled, water and some more efficient cooling technologies. So the myth is not exactly false, but it's just not complete. So this is another really common assumption, right? The thinking that if a data center uses 1 million gallons of water, it means that that 1 million gallons of water is lost permanently. Of course, that might sound logical, but that is not exactly how this works, my friend. I'll tell you. First things first, we need to understand that there is a difference between withdrawing water and consuming water in the case of data centers. Withdrawing water, consuming water, those are two different phenomenon, concepts, processes, stages, or whatever, right? Say with washing your car, for instance, of course you withdraw water to wash your car, you use water to wash your car, right? But not every drop of that water that you wash your car with completely disappears forever. Some of the water evaporates, which is very simple chemistry. Some of the water evaporates, some of the water flows into drains, and some of the water gets treated and returns to the water system. So it's a no-brainer that data centers also work in similar ways, right? When a data center withdraws water for cooling, not all of that water is permanently lost. A portion of said water is returned to the wastewater system where it can be treated and continue through the water cycle. Another portion is lost through evaporation during the cooling process. Of course, that is the part that can be considered consumed because it does not exactly because it does not exactly return to the local water supply, right? So when people hear that a data center withdrew millions of gallons of water, that does not automatically mean that those millions of gallons of water has disappeared or has been lost forever. Those are two different things. They can withdraw X amount of water, but doesn't mean that that X amount of water is gone for life. No, a lot of it is recycled and the like. So it's still there. And another point I really want to make is that not every data center even uses drinking water. Many modern facilities are now very much being designed to use reclaimed wastewater or treated sewage water or even seawater in places where it's available. And in those cases, they're not drawing directly from the same drinking water that supplies, that serves homes and businesses. So a data center's impact can very much vary. One facility might rely very much on communities drinking water, while another data center can rely mostly on recycled water, and another data center can return a huge portion of water it withdrew after treatment. So that is why you can't judge every data center by the same standard. It's not exactly right to say, oh, how much water does the data center use, right? That is not a complete question or a holistic question, right? It's you could ask questions like, oh, what kind of water is it using? Is it recycled water? Is it fresh drinking water? Is it treated sewage water? Is it seawater, right? Or how much of this water is it actually consuming? Like I said, withdrawing 1 million gallons of water doesn't exactly mean or automatically mean that amount of water is what is consumed, if you get what I mean. So and then also you can also ask questions like, say, how much of this water is returned into the system? If you care so much about this, these are the kind of question you should ask. What kind of water is he using? How much is it actually consuming? And how much water is it returning into the water system? Those are the kind of questions that I would say paint a much more complete picture around this entire discourse, right? So once again, it's not to say that this myth is completely false. It's just not contextual. It's just incomplete and a bit too sensational. That sounds believable, huh? What happens to the water depends on how the data center is cooled. I'll give an instance. Some cooling systems are designed to recirculate water over and over again. These are what we call closed-loop cooling systems. Let's think of an example. Say the cooling system in your car, right? You don't refill it every time you drive somewhere. The same coolant keeps circulating through the engine and it keeps carrying heat away before looping back to do it all over again. That's exactly how a lot of these modern data centers work, right? Instead of constantly pulling in fresh water, they reuse the same water multiple times, which dramatically reduces how much they need water overall, or how much water they will need overall, right? But then not every facility works like this, because some data centers rely on evaporative cooling, which is where portion of the water evaporates as it removes heat. That is where most of the water consumption happens, right? But even then, not everything does disappear. There's usually water that is left over after the cooling process. In the industry, would call this blow down water. Yeah, that's what it's called. So instead of being dumped into environment, it is typically sent to a wastewater treatment facility where it can be treated before re-entering the wider water system. So let's say a data center withdraws 100 millions of water over the course of a year. That does not automatically mean all 100 millions of gallons of water are gone forever. No, some of that water may evaporate during cooling, while some may be reused multiple times inside the facility, and some could be treated and returned into the water system. But then again, a balance would depend on the cooling system or the cooling technology that is being used by these data centers, right? So the actual thing here is not to just think, oh, the water just disappears. No, it is actually understanding where the water goes. Does it evaporate? Does it get rerouted into the water system or so? Like I would always say, the myths are not always outrightly false. It just might benefit from some nuance. Oh my God, no, guys, no, that is not the case. I mean, it sounds like common sense, of course, but nah. Again, when you think of such question or such question comes up, the first question you should ask is, where is the water coming from? Because that's sort of where this assumption depends on. Because again, like I said, not all data centers use communities drinking water. In fact, many newer facilities are deliberately moving away from using communities drinking water. Instead, they are using alternative water sources that are not exactly part of a community's everyday drinking supply. Some data centers deliberately use reclaimed wastewater, that is, water that is already being used and treated and repurposed for industrial applications rather than for drinking. So these water are off limits for drinking. It is for industrial applications, while others use what is called brackish groundwater, which is naturally too salty for people to drink, but it can still be used for cooling systems. So your drinking water is not being threatened, right? In coastal regions, even some facilities are very much exploring the use of seawater. Why am I using a straw? I think I just love to hold a pen while talking, right? So the goal is to simply reduce pressure on drinking water wherever possible. Guys, this thing of making it look like these companies are like these demons that are against, our lives or whatever, is not helping anybody, right? Just to be sure as well, or to be direct, it doesn't mean that every data center operates this way, right? Some of course still very much rely on community water supplies, right? And in communities where water is already under pressure, that can absolutely be justified concern. But more than you think, local governments are asking data centers to do more than simply reduce their water use. They're asking them to give back. Companies like Google and Microsoft have committed to becoming water positive. It means that their long-term goal is to replenish more water than they consume through conservation projects and local water restoration efforts. I think I'll do, some content around this on how companies are really responding to this entire water trend with data centers, right? So whether these companies achieve these goals is something we'll keep watching, but the pledges are already there. But on the bigger picture, it kind of shows you how much attention this issue is receiving across the industry. So it's not like everyone just sort of sitting down, folding their arms and watching things just, decay or whatever, right? The presence of a data center, I would say, does not automatically mean local residents will have less drinking water. That is too sensationalist and too simplistic a take to give, right? Of course, there are certain questions that ought to be asked if you do really care about it, which is, where is the water coming from? Is it drinking water that is being used, or is it reclaimed water that is being used in these data centers? These are questions to ask. You don't just go out there and just blot out anything, right? Where is the water coming from? Is it drinking water, or is it reclaimed water that is being used at these data centers? And then also, how well does the project fit into the community's long-term water plans? Referencing the Dales at Oregon, like I mentioned, obviously in such a case, that is sort of an endangered situation. So that is worthy of concern. So there's this assumption that if data centers use a lot of water today, it means that surely they will keep using a lot of water forever. That is not exactly what the industry is moving toward. So I'll just dispel this myth a bit. For the longest time, most large data centers relied heavily on evaporative cooling, where water helps carry heat away from servers. It's a proven technology, but it's also one that consumes significant amounts of water. That's exactly why a lot of companies are now investing in new ways to cool their facilities. For instance, some operators are switching, like I mentioned, to closed-loop cooling systems, which continuously recirculate water instead of constantly drawing in fresh supplies, while others are adopting direct liquid cooling, where a coolant is delivered much closer to the computer chips themselves, which makes the process far more efficient. All of this I've mentioned before, but I'm just sort of reiterating it. In cooler parts of the world, some facilities can now use outside air to cool their servers for much of the year, which reduces the need for water almost entirely. And as I've mentioned time and again in this video, many companies are replacing fresh drinking water with reclaimed or recycled water wherever possible. And the reason is very straightforward, as water is not just an environmental issue, it's also a business issue. And as AI grows and demand for computing keeps rising, if company wants to keep building larger data centers, they also need to find smarter and more sustainable ways to cool them. That's why we're seeing major investments into the industry. Microsoft has been developing cooling systems that can operate without water in certain regions. I should do a video about this one of these days as well. Google has also expanded its use of non-potable water across many of its facilities while pursuing some ambitious water replenish goals. As I'd mentioned, I'm going to do a video about this. Amazon is also working to increase the use of reclaimed water across dozens of its data centers over the coming years. However, none of this means that the problem has been solved. Very much far from it, but it does show that the industry is not just standing still and folding its arms. The technology is evolving because it has to. So it's not enough to ask if data centers are actually changing or if they will ever change. It's, are they actually changing fast enough? And that's a conversation that is still very much ongoing. So once again, the myth is not exactly false. It is just a bit incomplete and not nuanced. So this is probably the biggest misconception of everything, and that's probably what inspired this video, right? Whenever data centers and water come up, the conversation almost always revolves around how many gallons of water are being used by data centers. But then there are actually other questions that deserve just as much attention, and we don't talk about it enough, and that is sort of what I want to bring in this final dispelling, or what do I call it? This entire thing is not just about how much water goes in, it's also about what comes back out. After water has been used in cooling systems, it does not always leave exactly the same condition. Depending on the type of cooling system being used, that water may contain treatment chemicals, that is minerals that have become more concentrated during the cooling process, or even trace metals picked up from the equipment. That's why wastewater management is such an important part of operating a modern data center facility. If that water is not treated properly before it is discharged, it can put pressure on wastewater treatment facilities, or in worst cases affect nearby waterways. That is why many communities now require large data centers to treat their wastewater before releasing it. Some facilities even operate their own on-site treatment systems to make sure that the water meets environmental standards before it leaves the site. And very much so, these data center facilities and these operators are using real-time monitoring systems to keep checking water quality throughout the cooling process. So while everyone is just focused on gallons and the likes, right, engineers or the right people who care about these things are also paying close attention to water quality, because protecting a community's water supply is not just about using less water, it's also about returning cleaner water. And that is just as important, because if we focus only on quantity, we risk overlooking quality. And in many communities, both very much matter. So as we have seen today, many of these myths contain a grain of truth, of course, but very few of them tell the whole story. They're not all nuanced as they should be. Yes, of course, data centers use water. And yes, in some communities that raises very valid, relevant concerns. But of course, context matters, right? And it is just as important, because the type of cooling system being used, where the water is coming from, how much is actually consumed, how wastewater is managed as well, and how well a facility fits into the community's long-term water plan. These are all very, valid questions, worth asking, and all of these things very much shape a data center's real environmental impact. I think that should be the biggest lesson from today's Mythbusters, right? The internet often rewards the simplest, most controversial, buzziest explanation. But again, reality and the real world is usually a lot more nuanced, which is why it's important for you to subscribe to this channel, because we kind of keep giving you on the ground reality and not sensationalist things, right? And if we are going to have better conversations about technology, we have to be willing to make room for that nuance. I want you to remember that the goal is not to believe everything every headline, and also it's not to dismiss every concern either. The goal for this channel or for this particular program is to understand what is actually true, because that's how we make better decisions and have better conversations. I am the internet nerd once again, and remember again, the internet is full of claims, and my job is to separate the myths from reality. Myths, gosh. Thanks for sticking around once again, and I'll see you in the next MythBusters.